Hey, welcome back to the How to Podcast series. It's Dave with you. I want to talk about intros here on the How to Podcast series. I had a question from a listener asking about my thoughts around the podcast intro for each episode and my thoughts around this. And I want to talk about that here on the podcast. So how to do a good intro on the How to Podcast series. And you're judging my intro right now, aren't you? Yeah, you are. You're judging my intro. Let's get the music. Let's just get going on this. All right, here we go. Now, what determines a good intro really depends on you, your style, your podcast, and it's probably the two most popular words that come up anytime people have a question about podcasting, and those two words are, it depends. It's true. It does depend. It depends on so many different things. But one thing that is pretty clear is that podcasts tend to lose between 20 to 35% of their listeners within the first 5 minutes of pressing play. First 5 minutes. You have a 45-minute show. That means 40 minutes of your podcast are not even listened to if you can't keep the attention of your listener within the first few minutes of your podcast. So your intro is very important. Maybe one thing to avoid as a listener of podcasts is a lot of promotion of yourself, your book, your course, your website, all of your sponsors up front, your supplements, your mattress, your sleep aid, your pillow, your underwear, whatever, hitting people with commercials, just commercial after commercial. And then a whole big thing about you right at the beginning is probably not a great place to start. The importance of having a good podcast intro is so key. If you're not hooking your listeners in within the first few minutes of your show, they're not going to continue listening. Think of it, when you listen to a podcast, you have your phone out, okay? So I have my phone is in my hand right now. I hit play on an episode, and as the episode's queuing up to start, I'm at this critical moment right in time where I'm deciding whether to bounce to another podcast because what I hear is not what I want to hear, or put my phone into my pocket or put it away and carry on with listening to the show. What you want to do in the first few minutes of your podcast is you want people to abandon their phone, put it away, and continue listening to your show. You don't want them staring at their phone going, I don't even know if I want to listen to this. I don't even know if this is for me. You want to hit them right away with what the show's about, what they're going to experience in this episode, and get them to put their phone down or put it away or put it in their pocket, put it back in their bag, whatever, and have them stay with you for the rest of the show. I want you to kind of remember as well, too, that when you release your next episode, it could be episode 1, it could be episode 201, that there's the potential that a new listener has just found your show for the very first time and they hit play on the most recent episode. They have never, ever heard any of your past episodes. Ever. They found out about your show from a friend. They found out about it from a recommendation, a search, whatever. They're here for the very first time. They know nothing. Don't assume your audience knows everything about you. Don't assume that your audience knows your entire history. You could have somebody brand new showing up to your podcast and they have no clue what's going on and they don't know who you are. They don't know who your co-host is. They don't know what's going to happen next. They don't know what they're in for, and you need to welcome them from the beginning. So your intro is key. So you need to make sure that your show focuses on who the podcast is for and why your new or returning listener should stick around for this particular episode. If you can, give some benefits to why this episode's important. So, welcome to the Blah 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 podcast, where today we're going to be talking about blah blah blah. And what I want you to walk away with today is the ability to blah blah blah. Make sure you put it out there. That kind of gives us all a sense of that we're all heading in the right direction. If you have guests on your show, please do not read their entire resume. Don't tell me that they were born at an early age and their favorite toy was, and they grew up in this city and then they moved to this city and their first job was a paper route and then they worked at a grocery store and they got their first dog when they were 10. Like, no. The quicker you can get to the content, to introducing your guest, and for us to hear their voice, the better. Keep in mind that your community, your returning listeners, trust you as a host that you're not going to waste their time with a guest that brings no value to the podcast, to the conversation, to them as a listener. That trust is already in there from the beginning. You're not going to waste my time as a podcast host bringing on somebody that's just going to be a waste of air. Like they just don't have anything to do with anything that I'd be interested in as a listener. I trust you to bring in great guests that are going to feed me as a listener and have me come back for the next episode. I just trust you. And that trust is inherently given to you by your community, and it's yours to lose by just bringing in anyone that can fill a chair. So make sure you're very good at screening your guests. You know that they're going to fit your audience, and your audience is going to enjoy the content of your conversation. So you do not need to prove to me that this person is worthy to be on the podcast. I already believe they are because you chose them. You said yes, and I pressed play. It's already built in. So summarize, make whatever you talk about as an intro to your guest, make it connect with the conversation that's coming up in the episode. So make sure there's a correlation between their backstory and what you're going to talk about, and get to them as soon as possible. And try to avoid what seems to be a common practice for some of the newer podcast hosts, where they have their guest introduce themselves instead of you doing it. This is your show. They're a guest. So please do your part to introduce your guest in a concise way. Get to the content, get to the conversation, so that, again, the person that's holding their phone is going to put it away because you've set this up in such a great way. On Living the Next Chapter, my author podcast, what I do is I pull a clip out of our chat during the interview, and I put it at the very beginning. And I do that, and I think I've mentioned this here before, and I do that for a reason. I want the very first voice that you hear on my show to be my guest. And if you ever listen to that podcast, which I would love if you checked out, livingthenextchapter.com, over 300 episodes in just over 2 years. It's a lot of podcast episodes. In that podcast, my guest is the first voice that you hear, and my guest is the very last voice that you hear. I do that on purpose because that podcast is not about me. I'm there to shine the light on my guests. They're the star of the show, and I'm doing it for them to help them sell their books and to connect you as an author or a reader to the great guests that come on that show. So I purposely do that so that I am not the first thing you hear, and I am not the last thing that you hear. It's how I structure the show, and it works for me in that podcast. I do other podcast episodes and other shows differently than that show, but it gives me a chance to do something different. So figure out what works for you, and this is going to take practice. It's going to take time to hone it in and figure out what works for you for your introduction of your guest. Just remember, we don't care about your guest. We care about you and we care about why this guest is even on the show. And your job as a host is to not convince us that this guest should be here by reading a really long bio that you pulled off of LinkedIn. No, that's not going to add any value. I don't need to know what their GPA was in university. I don't care what degrees they have, all that stuff. I'd rather just get to know your guest. Again, because I trust you to bring on great guests onto your show. Okay? So get to the guest as soon as you can. If you're going to use any type of music in your intro, just a word of caution. If you use any kind of music with lyrics and there's someone singing in the music, it's going to be hard because I'm going to be, as a listener, I'm going to be listening to the lyrics of the song and then trying to listen to you speak over top of it. I prefer to go with instrumental music, and I prefer to have that music quieter than my voice so that I'm not battling over top or fighting with the music to be heard. So if you're going to use a music bed in behind you, make sure it's quiet enough that it doesn't interfere with you talking. And the other part is maybe don't use music and then let the music play all the way out to completion and then you start talking. It just feels like there's music for no real reason. So a music bed and then you speaking over it works really well. If your software doesn't allow you to do that kind of editing, then jump over to Audacity because it's really super easy to do that. And I'm going to have some tutorials coming up to show you in real time how I do it and give you some tips on how to make your music fade in, fade out, all that kind of stuff. So Audacity is a free program. I'm using it to record right now. And it's super easy once you get the hang of it. And again, I'd like to show you how to use it if you want to learn how to edit your own show and stop paying for somebody to do it. I can teach you. If you want to start paying somebody to do your editing, I also do that as well. So reach out to me, howtopodcast.ca. When you use music as well, just a thought, try if possible, if it works for you and how you do your show, use the same consistent music over and over again. If your music is different every single time somebody presses play, it doesn't really add some brand recognition to your show. So when you hear the music for my show, as we mentioned in the past, you know you've hit play on this episode. So just keep that in mind. So you want to make sure that you use the name of your podcast when you introduce your show. So when I come on, it's the How to Podcast series. Hello, welcome to the show. Make sure, and it's important that you do that because, it might be somebody's first time to the podcast, or they have you on a playlist with other shows, and your show comes up and you just start talking. It's like, what show am I on now? So just use that as a point of reference. Make sure you talk about what your podcast is about. If you have a tagline, if you say this is what the podcast is for, it's a podcast about the thing, and it's for these people so that you can do this with it. And make sure you use your own name as well. Introducing yourself is great because people then connect with you and as the voice of the show, and they get to build that relationship with you. So don't be afraid to say your name and let people know who you are. A little bonus tip here as well. If you have a lot of episodes, over time, you're going to build up a whole library of back episodes that people can go back and listen to at any time. And sometimes people will binge all of your shows. Like go back to the very beginning and hit play on episode 1 and listen all the way through your 300 episodes. Wow, that's amazing. And one of the most frustrating things for me as a listener to podcasts is when a host has an ad at the very beginning of their podcast and then the exact same ad at the very end of their podcast. So what happens as I listen to your show, if that's the case, is I start with the ad for whatever. I listen to your entire episode and that same ad reappears, plays it again at the end, and then I go from that episode to your next episode. And what happens? I get back-to-back commercials for the exact same thing, which is very annoying. So make sure that you don't do back-to-back ads like that. Maybe if you are going to do an ad at the end of your podcast, just make it different than the very first ad that you do at the start of the next show. So we don't have the same ad twice. That's really annoying. The other thing is, if you are thinking of from the idea of the listener listening to multiple episodes of your show, if you have the same music at the beginning and at the end, when somebody goes through your episodes and goes to the next episode, that music just kind of fades out from episode 1 and fades in for episode 2. It's that consistent feel. If you watch Netflix and you watch a TV show, the music ends for one show, the same music comes in, you feel like you're just continuing on. So think about how your podcast ends and how the next podcast begins, and see if you can build it so that it feels very cohesive from one episode to the next. It's really a nice way to kind of do that. I'd love to hear what you do in your intros. So if you have a sample intro that you'd like to send to me, send me a link to your website, to your podcast, and tell me, hey, Dave, here's my intro. Can you play it on the How to Podcast series? I'll collect a bunch of intros and I'll play them here on the show and give you a shout out to your podcast so people can find your show and fall in love with you. But I'd love to hear your intro and what you think an intro should sound like. Again, it depends. And what works for me might not work for you. But these are just some basic guidelines around creating a great podcast intro and doing it the right way. So hopefully this helps a little bit as a guide as you plan out your next intro for your podcast. And if you're not sure what good looks like and you want some feedback, you want another opinion to maybe help guide you in the process, reach out to me, howtopodcast.ca. Let's get together on Zoom and we'll go over your intro together. Let's work on it together. You don't have to do this by yourself. That's why I created this show. I love to connect with you. I love to work with you, help you however I can, and looking forward to connecting with you. Reminder that we have links on the website on howtopodcast.ca to our meetups. And we're holding regular meetups on meetup.com, and it's for podcasters anywhere in the world. You don't have to be a Canadian podcaster. You don't have to be in North America. It could be anywhere in the world. And come to one of our meetups and meet other podcasters, and we just talk podcasting. And we go and do screen shares, and we talk about everything in podcasting, variety of topics, and we would love to have you there, meet other podcasters, grow in community together, be accountable to each other, and just help each other by listening to other voices than just mine. And that's why I love having the co-hosted episodes here on the show, because you get to hear other podcasters' point of view and not just Dave all the time. And I appreciate that you love coming and listening to the show. That means so much to me. And I love getting your emails and messages and voicemails. But I also want you to hear from other people so that we get a good perspective on what podcasting means to others and what works for them. Because I'm learning at the same time. We're all here together. We're all learning together. And we're all trying to help each other grow. And what I love is the How to Podcast family. We get together and we support each other. And we're there for each other. And if you want that kind of support for you as a podcaster, just starting out, or you want to continue with your show, you're looking for community, How to Podcast. .ca. Really simple. Remember, it's .ca because I live in Canada. Howtopodcast.ca. We'll see you there. I can't wait to hear the intro to your show. Let me know. We'll talk soon. Hey, it's Dave jumping on here at the end. I hope you're doing well. Thank you for listening to the How to Podcast series. Putting this out there for you. You're starting a podcast and you're like, Dave, the technology is giving me a headache. This editing thing is, I don't know, it's banana pants. I can't figure it all out. And you're thinking, if there was somebody who could help me with my podcast, I would pay them to do the editing for me. Guess what? I'm actually doing that. I have clients now, past guests who've been on the show on one of my other podcasts, on this podcast. I'm doing some podcast consulting. I'm doing podcast editing. I'm helping with people launching their podcast, getting it, all the technology stuff, all getting your podcast in all the players, helping you with your YouTube channel, your website. Oh, it just goes on and on. It goes on and on. And I would love to help you. So instead of going to Fiverr or Upwork, I've been on there. I keep trying to get on for jobs and nobody's paying attention to me. And I need attention. I would rather work with you as a listener of the show. So here's what I'm saying. Go to howtopodcast.ca, leave me a voice message, tell me what you need, and let's work out something that works for you and your budget. And if you need full service or you just need something quick like a drive-through type service, I'm there for you. I got you. And if you like what you hear on any of my 7 podcasts, I can do that for you. I can. And I'd love to work with you because you are amazing. And I'm there to help you, whatever you need. howtopodcast.ca. Reach out, let me know what I can do to help you with your podcast. Thank you for listening. Catch you on the next episode. Take care.